I've spent hundreds of hours of my life watching multi-season television dramas. Now, the shows and the storylines, for me, they've kind of changed over the years, right? First, there was Chips and Little House on the Prairie, West Wing and Madam Secretary, Call the Midwife, Star Wars and The Mandalorian. You know, and I don't think I'm alone in this. We enjoy living inside the story of others, whether it's real or whether it's fiction. We see our own lives through the experiences of these main characters, and we go on multi-episode seasonal journeys with these characters. And I think what's happening is that in the story of others, we're hard at work to understand our own story. Whether we're watching it on screen or whether we're thinking about our own lives, really, we're trying to answer questions. We want to know what's going on, what's going to happen next, and what does it all mean? And on this journey to understand our own stories, I think what we could do is we could get pretty good at trying to write the episodes, trying to write the seasons. We take on a pursuit or a relationship or a hobby or an adventure because it helps us to write episodes of our story. And I think it starts when we're young. For me, I can remember all the way back to being 8 years old, episode baseball cards, right? More of these, life is better. Middle school and high school, episode football star. I'm great, everybody cheers. Through my 20s, episode music writing. Through music, I can express myself, right? Also through my 20s, episode relationships. In relationships, I'm needed, I belong. Through my 20s and my 30s, episode adventures. Adventures make great stories to compare to others. Also through my 20s and 30s, episode career. My career brings praise for what I'm good at. And really, for you, for me, this can go on and on and on. And I think for followers of Christ, when it comes to story and episode writing, really there's two options. Here's option number one. Option one, God is an add-on to the story that I write, the story that we write. God comes with us through the episodes and the seasons that we create. We elevate things like pursuits, relationships, hobbies, and adventures. It all goes up into first place for a time. We make the episode and we move the story along. We write the story, we get the glory because we did something. Option one. But there's option two. And option two is God is the story. He writes every episode and every season. We wait on the story writer. We experience the next episode and we affirm that he is a really good writer. And we're satisfied. And it's enough. And he gets the glory. So, on the road of life, we either manage and control the story or we believe and we submit to God's story. So today we're going to continue our study in the book of Exodus, and I love Exodus because God's story in Exodus is like the perfect story to help us to understand our own story, right? Think about it. The people in the book of Exodus, they're on the road out. They're on the road out of slavery and confusion, understanding who God is and their identity as his people. That's our story, right? In many ways, I think all of us, we're on the road out of slavery and confusion in some form, understanding who God is and our identity in him. And here's the big idea for everything that we're going to talk about today, right? Only God can write a story that will satisfy and keep us free. Only God can write a story that will satisfy and keep us free. We were made to live inside of God's story. He's the main character. He's the whole point. We don't need to elevate anyone, anything, any way of thinking. We don't need to put anything into first place because we don't have to write the episodes. In God's story, we get to know life in Christ. And in God's story, we get to join God on his mission to bring life in Christ to others. Only God can write a story that will satisfy and keep us free. Okay. So we're going to end up in Exodus chapter 32 today. But what I want to do before we get there is I want to give you a flyover of the whole story, okay? So here's Exodus. Are you ready? Joseph made Israel, the nation of Israel, famous because Israel saves Egypt from famine. Okay? Israel gets big as a nation, and it intimidates the Pharaoh, leader of Egypt. So what he does is he tries to control the growth, and he makes Israel his slaves. Horrible, backbreaking slavery. People cry out to God. God sees, he hears, he knows, and he makes a promise to rescue them. Things get worse for Israel, right? They have to make bricks without straw, but God miraculously sets them free. Passover, right? Passover makes it so that Israel does not have to experience the consequences of their sin. Egypt, the enemy, is completely destroyed at the bottom of the Red Sea. God guides Israel through the wilderness, cloud by day, fire by night. He provides for every need that they have, manna, quail, water. And all along the way, God is giving his people commandments and laws so that they can understand who he is and who they are in him, and so that they can know his goodness and they can know his love. They can learn how to be a community, right? It's a good story. It's amazing. And right at this moment today, where we're going to kind of pick up the story, right at this moment, God's people, they're completely satisfied inside of God's story. They're living completely inside of God's story. They're satisfied. They're eager. They're ready for whatever's next. They're good. Now, we know they're good because it says so. It says it twice. Exodus chapter 24, verse 3. Moses went, told all the people the Lord's words and laws, and they responded with one voice. Everything the Lord has said, we will do. Then it says it again in verse 7. Moses took the book of the covenant and he read it to the people, and they responded, we will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey. Right? So right at this moment, God's people, they're living it completely inside of the story, and they're satisfied. They're eager. They're ready for whatever's next. But here's where we pick up the story today. Moses goes up the mountain of God at Sinai. And Moses is going up that mountain to get the blueprint and the design for what's called the Tabernacle, okay? The Tabernacle is the next episode in God's story. Now, the Tabernacle is a place that the people are going to build on earth. And it's a place where God was going to reveal himself, his presence to his people, and the people were going to be able to interact with God. God knew exactly what was next in the story. And he was giving it to Moses on the mountain, and it was good. But at this point in the story, from the people's perspective, let me say that again. From the people's perspective, from Israel's perspective, the story wasn't going how they wanted it to go. Moses was taking too long on the mountain. They were kind of getting disoriented in the story. They wanted God. They wanted Moses back. They wanted the next episode. And in all of the chaos and in all of the confusion, in a moment, they break their agreement to stay inside of God's story and to follow him and to obey him. They couldn't submit anymore to the perfect, awesome storyteller. And that's where we're going to pick it up today. God's people, they take control of the story and they make their own episode. Let's see how they do. Exodus 32, starting in verse 1. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, and here's what they said. Come, make us gods. Make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. Aaron answers them, take off the gold earrings that your wives and your sons and your daughters are wearing. Bring them to me. So all the people, they took off their earrings and they brought them to Aaron. And he took what they handed him and he made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. And then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and he made an announcement. Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. So the next day the people rose early, they sacrificed burnt offerings, they presented fellowship offerings, and afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. What were they doing? Instead of waiting for the very plan and design that Moses was up on the mountain getting for them, instead of waiting to receive the perfect next episode that God was in the process of writing, so that they could experience the tabernacle, the presence of God on earth, and a place to engage with God, instead of waiting for the next episode, they took the story. They took the storyline. They wanted an experience of God. They wanted an experience so bad. The next chapter wasn't clear, so they make this golden calf. Golden calf. Well, to understand a golden calf, we kind of have to understand Egyptian culture. Israel as a nation, remember I kind of walked through the storyline, as a nation, as a people, they grew up inside of Egyptian culture, okay? And in Egyptian culture, that was a culture of idol worship. And basically what you did is you made something, and what you made helped you interact with a god. So culturally, what Israel did, it's understandable. Maybe even a good effort, but it was wrong. It was wrong because they bought the lie that writing the next episode of God's story was up to them. It was wrong because what they created was a counterfeit. It wasn't even real when you think about it. They made the next episode to manage and control the story because they didn't fully believe God's story and his ability to write a really, really good next episode. And the idol that they made, this golden calf, that was the means, that was the thing that Israel did to take control. Let's think about this. Why did they do it? Well, they were human. They felt human things. They felt impatient, right? They were afraid of the unknown, disappointed. They wanted something they could touch, that they could see, that they could experience. They wanted hope. They wanted the next episode, right? That's understandable. If you think about their emotions as people, it's understandable. But it was wrong. God's people took responsibility for moving the story forward by creating the golden calf to achieve meaning or value or significance and security or whatever else they were going for in that, right? So here are the questions for us. Here are the questions today. Are we taking responsibility for moving God's story forward? Are we elevating something or someone or some idea? Are we creating something, putting it into first place, and trying to write the next episode? How do I know if I'm doing it? What happens if it's true? What does God have to say about it? Here's some good questions I think we could ask right now to help us to kind of think about those questions, right? If we think about story. Am I willing to sin to get the next episode of God's story? Am I willing to sin if I think I'm going to lose somehow inside of God's story? Am I turning to someone or something or some mindset as a refuge and comfort instead of going to God? If we let anything or anyone or any mindset write the story, we're writing the next episode. We could use anything to write the next episode. Maybe it's performance, pleasing someone to get accepted. Maybe it's perfectionism, performing to a certain standard that you set or that somebody else sets. Maybe it's the performance of others. If people don't do things, you become judgmental and unloving. Are we trying to write the next episode through success or power or being respected or admired by being self-sufficient or independent? Hobbies, worldly pleasures. If we let anything or anyone or any mindset write the story, if we let anything write the story, we're trying to write the next episode. And only God can write a story that will satisfy and keep us free. It's a big deal. Episode writing, trying to take the storyline. It's a big deal because if we're trying to write the story, if we're trying to write an episode, really what we're doing is we're working to create what I'll call an alternate reality. Think of Israel. They were struggling. They tried to write the episode that God was in the process of writing. They tried to write the episode of the Tabernacle. Think about this for a second. People tried to write the episode of the presence of God with man. Their experience with this golden calf that they made, it was completely fake. Fake stories will never satisfy. And fake stories compete with God. In God's story, God's the writer, He's the perfecter, He's the initiator, He's the sustainer of reality. Think about it. If you create reality, that's what God does. God creates reality. And if we try to create an alternate reality, we're trying to be God. And we're not designed to carry the load of story writing and to keep it going. And to be honest, I don't even think we're the best story writers. I want to live in reality. And I want to be satisfied. And God's story is reality. And only God can write a story that will satisfy and keep us free. So story writing and episode writing is a big deal for a second reason, and it's this. Writing your own story in many ways can be like volunteering for slavery. Think about that phrase, volunteering for slavery. Anybody here want to volunteer for slavery? Right? We can elevate addictions or addictive mindsets that bring temporary good feelings or a temporary explanation or temporary relief when we experience the weight of life and we don't know what's going to happen next. When I think of addictions, I think of pornography, substance abuse, controlling our relationships, controlling people. These addictions, they can begin as little snares that we can get out of easily. But these little snares can grow into these elaborate shackling systems that enslave us. If we use an addiction or an addictive mindset to write the story or to write the next episode in our story, we have to work pretty hard to maintain and sustain that narrative, right? One lie grows into a system of lies. One mindset grows into an entire system of explaining and defending. God alone wants to be the solution for all of the troubles that we face in life. I've been shackled in slavery. It never feels good. Yet we have a tendency, I think, to volunteer for slavery when God's story isn't making sense. Only God can write a story that will satisfy and keep us free. Third and final reason why writing the episode or taking the narrative away from God is a big deal is because writing our own story, really, when you think about it, it mocks God. It mocks him. Psalm 106 says it this way, reflecting on what the Israelites are doing in this situation. Psalm 106, verse 20, it says, "They exchanged the glory of God for the image of a bull that eats grass." Right? Think about that. They exchange what? They exchange what? The glory of God for the image of a bull that eats grass. It's crazy. That sounds crazy. And I think if we were to compare the episodes that we create through the things that we do, we compare our episodes with the steadfast love and faithfulness of God and his story, we'd find that our episodes are pretty ridiculous too. And this isn't the first time in the story that Israel had gotten lost inside of God's story and tried to write an episode. Back in chapter 16 in Exodus, the Egyptians elevated this thought about God's story that was completely crazy. They were wondering if the God who had done all of these miracles to set them free from slavery and to literally destroy their enemy, they wondered if that same God had remembered that they were human and needed food to survive. They were hungry, and they thought maybe God forgot about that. And here's what they said, and here's what happened. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food that we wanted. But you've brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." They're thinking here, and what they're saying is a complete mockery of the leadership structure that God set up, right? Moses and Aaron, and a complete mockery of God himself and his ability to provide. And it's a mockery of God because they rewrote the story of what really happened. And they started saying crazy things. Slavery was great. We ate like kings. It was better. God is gone. The story is over. Really? I think we're interesting as people because I think in moments we can be so sensitive to God's honor, right? Yet in moments at the same time, trade God's honor and our honored positions as his people by rewriting history and making crazy claims about God and what's next. And we weren't made to mock God. We were made to praise God, right? Here's the whole message. Here's the whole message today. If you're at work to move the story forward, in your thoughts or in your actions, if you're working to move your story forward, you need to give the story back. Just give the story back. Because only God can write a story that will satisfy and keep us free. So where's the good news in all of this, right? There's good news. And the good news for Israel is found in chapter 32. The good news for Israel is that God gives them a way out. He gives them a road out. And the road out for Israel is that God exposed them for trying to write the next episode of their story. He exposes it. He points it out, calls them out, puts his finger on it. The Lord said to Moses, go down because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt, they've become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and they've made themselves an idol in the shape of a calf. They've bowed down to it and sacrificed to it, and they've said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. The road out for Israel begins with God exposing what they did. And he's beginning a process to help them give the story back. Have you ever watched an episode of a show? And as you're watching this show on TV or the screen, you're thinking to yourself, oh no, what is this person doing? And you literally want to reach into the screen and fix it for them, to show them, like, no, this is where you made the mistake. You shouldn't have done that. You should have done this, right? My wife does that out loud while we're watching. But you want to show it to them because you want them to see it, because if you can't see it, you can't fix it, right? Have you ever looked into the life of somebody that you care about? If you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. You look into the lives of your kids. If you're a teenager, you know what I'm talking about. You watch your friends do what they do. Or in your extended family, and you think to yourself, this is not a good choice. This is not the way it's supposed to be. Something needs to be done about this. That's what God does. That's what God does for Israel. It probably didn't feel good at first for them to be exposed for this golden calf thing and all the worship they did. I don't even know what that looks like. They engaged in revelry, right? I don't want to go into that, right? It probably didn't feel good at first for them to be exposed, but being called out by God is an act of love. That's where the road out starts. That's where giving the story back starts. For Israel, the road out means that God shows Israel that this is serious. This is serious. And I can't think of any more serious words that God says to Moses. Listen to this. I have seen these people, the Lord says to Moses. They are stiff-necked. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. His seriousness here, his anger, it actually reflects a good thing. God is not okay with his people writing episodes of his story. Too much is at stake if we take the narrative. Too much was at stake for Israel, and too much is at stake for us. What's at stake? Our joy, our freedom, our protection, our growth. Those are important things, right? Have you ever felt loving anger? Because something serious was at stake in your life or somebody else's life? Have you ever wanted something for someone more than they wanted it for themselves? I think that's what's happening here. God's anger here is an expression of his deep, serious love for his people. So God exposes it. He communicates how serious it is. And the path out for Israel to give the story back is that God is faithful to his covenant promises. And this is really, really, really good news for Israel, and it's really, really good news for us. Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. Lord, he said, Lord, why should your anger burn against your people? Why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say? Why should the Egyptians be able to say, it was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent. Don't bring disaster on your people. Remember your servant Abraham, Isaac, Israel, to whom you swore by yourself, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. Then the Lord relented, and he did not bring on his people the disaster that he had threatened. Here's what's happening here. Israel finds themselves inside of the reality of God's covenant. The covenant of God is this always and forever promise to complete the work that he begins with the people that he identifies as his own. The promise covered them. When they were exposed, it covered them. Again and again, when they work to take the narrative and write the next episode, the covenant, it covers them. It's a pretty good thing that Israel has this advocate in Moses. Someone chosen by God to appeal on behalf of the goofiness and the brokenness and the sinfulness of his people. Goofiness, brokenness, sinfulness of his people, right? God is faithful and God is serious about getting his way. And that's awesome. That's awesome. And it's love, real love. Only God can write a story that will satisfy and keep us free. And the road out for Israel, the road out of this story writing to give the story back, the road out it's the same for us. It's the same exact road out. God will expose our attempts to write the episodes of our lives. He'll expose it. He'll do it through his word. He'll do it through the teaching of his word, right? He'll do it through his spirit that lives inside of us. He'll do it through people, his people. God will begin a process to help us give the story back when he sees that we've taken it and we're trying to write that next episode. He'll put his finger on it. And if God's putting his finger on it, it's not to condemn us or to shame us. I mean, being called out by God might not feel good at first. Being called out by God may shock us out of the episode that we're working pretty hard to create and maintain. But being called out by God is one of the most tremendous acts of love that God could offer. It's where the road out begins for us. 1 John chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 says it this way. Same idea. My little children, I'm writing these things to you. I'm writing these things to you so that you may not sin. But if anybody does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. He's the propitiation for our sins, not only for ours, but also for the sins of the world. It's good news. Israel has their advocate in Moses. We have our advocate in Jesus, right? All of the New Testament demonstrates God's forgiveness of sins through Christ. All of the New Testament demonstrates God's desire to align us with his story and how to give the story back if we've started episode writing. If God is putting his finger on something today in your life, praise God. That's a good thing. It's an opportunity for us to experience the mercy of God's forgiveness, to agree with God that something's off, and to give the story back. And just like when Israel was exposed, they're kind of wrapped up in this promise of God, right? Whether or not they deserve it, whether or not they're aware of it, whether or not they're engaged in it, doesn't matter. They are wrapped up inside of a promise of God. That's a good place to be. God is a promise maker and a promise keeper, he finishes what he begins. And all the New Testament is full of God's covenant promises. The whole New Testament is the roadmap for sanctification, which is really the guidebook on how we can not take the story and live inside of God's story. So here's what I want to do today in closing. I just want to read 3 covenant promises. And as you think of this whole concept of story and story writing and episodes, and is God writing the next episode? If I take in this thing, what am I putting in first place in my life that's not God? And as you think about all of this, I just want to make sure that these covenant promises of God are just washing over you as you think about this. The first one today, and they're everywhere, but I'm going to pick 3. 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 10. For godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, whereas worldly grief produces death. What is this saying? Well, it's saying that godly grief over our sin actually leads to freedom. So, got grief? Go with the grief. Go with it. Go with what God is putting his finger on and take the road out. And give the story back. Okay, promise 2. Just let it wash over you. Romans 8, verse 1. Therefore there is now no condemnation. No condemnation. No condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Because through Christ Jesus, the law of the Spirit who gives life has set you free from the law of sin and death. If God is beginning a work in you, if God has already been doing a work in you, if God is working in you to give the story back, there is no condemnation tied to God's work to do that. No condemnation. Third one, Philippians 1, verse 6. I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will see it and bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. Did you know that God is writing your story? He's writing your story. Trust the process. All of us, if you're a follower of Jesus, guess what? You're in process. You're a work in progress. And the work is to orient ourselves completely inside of God's story and for us to continually surrender the burden, the weight, responsibility, and the work that's involved with writing episodes. Doesn't it feel good to know that in Christ, when we're exposed for our sin, that we're wrapped up in these covenant promises? It covers us. The covenant promise that God is compassionate and gracious, that he's slow to anger, that he's abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. That's his promise. That's our God. Only God, only God, only God can write a story that will satisfy and keep us free. So, 3 Pastor's Challenge questions for you today. First one, where is God calling you to give the story back? By exposing something that you've used to take control of the story. Question 2, what can you do this week to demonstrate your agreement with what God is showing you? And number 3, what promises of God will you hang on to as you answer these questions and give the story back? Pray with me. God, you are a perfect story writer. We thank you for the story of your scripture. We thank you for the opportunity that we have as we engage with you through your word, with each other, as we engage all of these things that you make available to us. Thank you for the ways that you show us where we need to really let you lead and really need to let go. And we thank you for your grace and your love and this perfect process that we enter into as your people to become more like you and to be set up perfectly inside of your great story that you're writing here for us on earth. We pray that you'd help us to be at peace as we go, and that you'd help us to be a people that just grab onto your promises and go deeper in our trust that those promises are for us. I ask these things with confidence because I believe that you want to do that for us. And I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.